balls who want the finest wines available to humanity.
You've joined the Betamax Video Club, rewinding back to our favourite films of the 1980s. My name's Rich Nelson, and I'm joined by Rich Johnson of the Football Attic, and we've just rented Withnail and I. And so, Rich, how was rewatching the film for you?
It's always a pleasure to rewatch Withnail and I. It is honestly one of my favourite films of all time. I have watched it several years down the line now, since I first saw it. And it's one of those films that just never gets old. And also one of those films that if it's ever on telly, it doesn't matter which point I come in at it, I will still sit there and watch it, because it's one of those few films that, you know, when it's just on and you think, well, I know enough about the film to sort of pick it up from any point, so I'll just keep watching it. And it's incredibly pleasurable, even though I sort of made the note that it's actually a very quite depressing film, really. Because when I started watching it again, my wife said to me, "Oh, you're watching this?" Yeah, and she's like, "Oh, do you want to make yourself miserable?" I was like, well, no, it's just I really enjoy the film, but it is thoroughly depressing. I mean, the whole aspect of it, the whole setting of it, their flat, the two characters, and the whole thing is just it's almost like a tragedy. And so, but it's I don't know, it's not uplifting really, but it is just a great film. So I just ramble on there for 10 minutes.
No, well, it's one of those films, isn't it? It's always billed as, you know, one of the greatest comedies of, you know, the British comedies of all time, and, you know, everyone remembers it fondly for the quotes and some of the scenes in it. But you think sort of there aren't that many, you know, say you look at their flat and it almost reminds you of the flat in Bottom. You know, it's that sort of depressing, everything's brown and messy, and you're sort of waiting for something more slapstick to come. But, you know, most of the laughs you have end up coming from, you know, the situations they get themselves in, and the fact that Withnail, for example, is such a raging drunk, but a lovey with it. And, you know, you're kind of laughing at him because he's this sort of amplified, exaggerated character. And yet, you know, you sit there thinking, my God, that's how they live. You know, the trying to do the washing up and finding all sorts in there. There's comedy in it, but imagine being in that position where you have to do it. It's quite scary.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. And it's just, again, like you say, the amplification of the characters. It's the funny thing is, you look at, especially Withnail himself, you look at them and you just think, well, that could so easily have got, they could so easily have done it wrong, because it's a very exaggerated character. But at the same time, totally believable, because, you know, I mean, I've done a bit of Amdram myself in my past, and there are those people who are exactly like that. You know what I mean? I know we're going to come on to quotes later, but it's just one thing that really struck me when I was watching yesterday is the point where they've, obviously, like you say, they're living in squalor. And at one point, Withnail says, "I'm a trained actor reduced to the status of a bum," and it's just the way he says it, like with this sort of this hand that comes down as he says it. It's like kind of so dramatic and so kind of indignant that someone such a fine actor as he should be in this gross situation. And it's just, like I say, they could so easily have got it wrong, because it could easily have turned into like a carry-on film, but it doesn't, and it's because it doesn't, and because it's so well done, that it works. Like I say, it's such a fine line to tread with that sort of thing, where you could easily tip off and go into absolute caricature and just ridiculous, but it stays on the right side of realistic. And I think the depressing sort of scenario kind of adds to that.
Again, you have, like, you get in many films where there is, you know, the relationship between the two main characters, where you've got someone so, you know, quite frankly, ridiculous as Withnail, who, like you say, you can almost see that being a believable person, because, you know, he still thinks himself as great. And jumping ahead a little bit, he's talking about refusing to be an understudy when he gets offered a role. Yeah. You know, because he has such self-belief in himself, and yet, you know, he'll quite happily drink, you know, lighter fluid, you know, because why not? You know, if that's what's in the flat, that's what you do. And even asking for antifreeze and saying you should never mix your drinks. You know, it's the the version of Don't Drink Grape and Grain. It's just going down that load. But then you sort of take or Marwood, as I guess his real name is, and he seems to be playing it so straight, but without the sort of flamboyant side of Withnail. And I'll be honest, part of me, you think of conspiracy theory websites on, who talk about Star Wars or this, that, and the other, but part of me thinks, I wonder if there was an element where Withnail was in fact a figment of Paul McGann's imagination.
Oh. Wow, now we've suddenly gone very deep there.
It's all very Fight Club, isn't it?
I was going to say, it's like Fight Club, isn't it? Fight Club in a depressing... Well, actually, Fight Club was pretty depressing. Yeah. I'd never heard that one, actually. That's quite interesting to think of. Oh, man. The funny thing is, though, I think if that were the case, I think it would actually not ruin the film, but I think it would take away from it. Because I think... to find out that the character of Withnail is just almost like that kind of, and then we woke up and it was all a dream. It's like to find out that this great character such as Withnail is actually just a figment of someone's imagination. That would really know, because you want to believe that there are real people like that, because there are. I've met a few of them, and it's just, maybe not to that extreme, but that spun me out. That
oh no. I've ruined it already.
You have, yeah. I hate this film now.
Brilliant. But I say, moving on, do you sort of think that, part of it's not one of the biggest casts in any film, and yet, some of the, it's got one of the best sort of semi, side characters in Uncle Monty, who's again ludicrous in his own way. He's Withnail's uncle, and yet he almost steals the show, certainly in the scenes that he's in. He manages to be in the same country house as Withnail and I later on, and yet, he's such a presence. I mean, it's the same in most of the films that he's done, but he's a rapey bastard, isn't he?
Well, it's the line where he says, I will have you, even if it must be burglary. It's like, it's just, but I think that's one of the things that I really do love about the film. And I sort of, when I was sort of making notes when I was rewatching it, I kind of made the note that every character in it, every person they have playing the characters, it seems to be perfect for the role they have. And I'm not just talking like the main characters, but even like Michael Elphick as the poacher, and even the guy behind the bar, the old drunk behind the bar, right down to the copper that says, "Get in the back of the van." They just, there isn't someone that's, there is no person in the film that seems to drag it down at all. You often get films where you've got like a couple of brilliant actors or something, and then you've got a couple who are, okay. But this one just, it doesn't matter what their role is or their character. Everyone just seems to fit perfectly in it.
But moving on to that, and it's something I know we sort of prompted earlier on. If this film was remade today, who do you think would be the actors? Or who could possibly pull off certainly the outlandish Withnail or Uncle Monty?
Well, when I was considering this, I ended up while I was trying to make notes, I ended up actually just writing a rant about this idea. And I just put sort of like, I hope in all sincerity no one ever does remake it, because why would you? It's perfect and it doesn't need remaking. It's just, and I know it's easy to say that because it's like, you'll look at films down the years and you'll think, oh, that's a really great film. And then you'll find out it's actually like the third version of that film. So there are films out there that have been remade almost like without you knowing it, because it's like the one we know is actually a remake. So, but I mean, in terms of, I suppose, because even though it was made in the 80s, it was set at the end of the 60s. So you don't have that kind of issue of, if you remade it, it would take it out of its time. I think it would, if they remade it and tried to do it now, as in set now, it wouldn't work, because it's so of the time that it's set in. But because it wasn't about the 80s, you have the advantage that it ages well as well, because it's not kind of stylized at the time. It's already stylized into the past. Yeah. And so I think if someone remade it, you have that advantage in that when they set it in the past, it wouldn't be such an issue. But I don't know. I really hope no one does it, because I don't see what the point would be. It's like, if you remake something, that, there has to be a good reason for remaking it, other than just making money, which seems to be a lot of reasons why they remake things these days. It's like, you can take certain films and remake them, and because you want to improve on it, because there are certain films out there that were made at a time, and they, for whatever reason, be it sort of technical abilities or just the styling of that time, it hasn't aged well. So, for instance, say like, I don't know, just one that's randomly popped into mind, the Amityville Horror. When you look back at that original film, the Amityville it's you look watching now and it looks so dated.
Yeah.
And it's not a great film in that sense. And it was remade in the sort of mid 2000s. And actually, to be honest, I thought it wasn't a bad remake. I think it got pretty much panned, but I think that's because the original film wasn't that great to start with. But I think if you take a great film and try and remake it, it's like, why bother? You already have this perfect film. It doesn't need it. It's like, I think I made a comment. It's like, no one's ever repainted the Mona Lisa. And we have no plans to redo the Sistine Chapel in glorious 3D CGI. So why? There's just no need. So I was really struggling with this. And so in the end, I just came to the conclusion that it's a perfect piece of art and should be left as such. So I couldn't think of anyone who could actually remake it, because I couldn't actually bring myself to consider that as a possibility.
Yeah. Well, I had this, again, I'm not a fan of remaking, and you sort of think, one that sticks in my head, because Withnail and I is based on, sort of novel, isn't it? When you think that you go back to a source material and, we'll take, say, Total Recall, for example. One of the earlier one was one of my favourite films anyway, with Schwarzenegger. And yet what they did with the remake was they didn't remake the film, they remade the version of the book. And it actually turned out to be quite different. Didn't make it any better. I still hated it. But, and I had this horrible vision, and, thinking with this question in mind, and a lot of it was very, just looking purely on visual, sort of what do the actors look like, and who do they portray. This horrible, hideous vision of Withnail being played by Russell Brand. And I just thought, oh God, what have I done? I thought I've opened up a can of worms here.
Oh, Jesus Christ, if that ever happens. Oh, no, you are done.
Well,
you put that thought in my head now.
Well, hopefully no one of any importance is listening to this and thinking...
Oh, God, could you imagine that? Oh, man, I'm almost losing faith in humanity just the thought. but that's the thing as well, because you think they'd have to. You kind of get the feeling they'd end up going for stars, just to sort of, have that cachet. But I guess I just don't see the point. It's like Get Carter. Get Carter to me is perfect as it is. Yes, it's very dated, but at the same time, it doesn't matter because it's set in the 70s. It is very dated, but it's a great film in itself, and that to me is what kind of transcends the dating of a film. If it is a great film in itself, you get past the dating side of it because you just look at it and think, well, it's an old film.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like The Shining as well. That looks dated now, obviously, but it's a cracking film. But and E.T. I mean, like, no one's ever sort of said, oh, should we remake E.T.? Because it was perfect the way it was, even though it looks very early 80s, because it is from the early 80s. It doesn't matter, because it just looks like, if they remade it now and set it in the early 80s, it would look the same. So what's the point?
And then on the other hand, you look at, Back to the Future, and you think, right, they actually made a storyline in that where it's set in 2015. And of course, all we did when it came around to that date was, well, did that happen? Well, that didn't happen. Oh, well, if you think, we're talking by Skype now, that's how they talk in that film. It's all very sort of roundabout, really. And, again, we've chosen an 80s film to talk about that was set in 1969. So,
yeah,
it's, we're already pushing the boundaries, I guess. But, sort of, when you think of some of the scenes, even when you go, moving into the Lake District where they are, and they're talking, the scene with the Randy Bull. I mean, it's perfectly done. And thinking about that, even, whenever it is, 60s, 80s, if it was done now, it's still funny because ultimately it's a crude joke. it's a randy bull that wants to have sex with something. It just happens to be, Paul McGann, and why not?
Well, exactly. I mean, if I was that bull, I would quite have a go at Paul McGann myself. He's a beautiful human being. But the funny thing is with that as well is that, I was just going to say, it's like that is a perfect example of, I mean, that's a slapstick.
Yeah.
If you look at that, it's slapstick in its approach. It's not, there's nothing clever about that piece. It's just a bull and someone confronted by it. It's just like a cartoon, really. But it works without descending into crap slapstick because, again, of the characters who are in it. And, of course, if you stick swearing in it. I mean, I mean, the fact that you've just got Withnail standing there just leaning casually on the wall, just sort of like giving him instructions. The farmer says something and he just repeats it to him like he's an expert. Hence the line, "A coward you are, Withnail, an expert on bulls you are not." It's like, and it's just the fact that he's such an arsehole, just sort of leaning there, kind of very calm and everything, because he's not the one facing down this randy bull. And just sort of, it's exactly what mates would do, though, isn't it? You'd sit there, the guy is in potential danger of his life, and the rest of us sit around and take the piss.
And it's not long afterwards that we get the part where they go back and find that Uncle Monty's arrived, and it's, "Monty, you terrible cunt."
Yeah.
And I mean, we'd already met Uncle Monty at this point when they've gone round to his flat, before they've taken this holiday. And, he is just, you can tell he's playing that fruity, very sort of, that old gentleman who's predatory, but it seems to be given off the fact that because he's chasing a man, it's not so bad. I think if this was a scene where he was grabbing...
Well, exactly, yeah.
If he was grabbing a woman saying, "It must be burglary," it's... you'd start getting the... Well, if they were any younger, it'd be the Operation U-Tree detectives round, but...
Exactly. Well, that's one of the funny thing is, actually, is in terms of, like, having rewatched it down the years, there are things that sort of you miss at times, and there's one joke that I'd missed all these years, and I only saw it when I rewatched it again, and that's the bit where they meet the farmer, which of course spawns one of the best lines, where Withnail keeps saying, "Are you the farmer?" To which Mar would reply, "Stop saying that, Withnail. Of course he's the fucking farmer," because it's a guy on a tractor and on a farm, But there's a bit where they're saying, "Oh, we're renting the cottage off, what's his face, Montague Withnail," and he says, "Oh, I can't him," and he says, and the farmer doesn't know, and then French fella, something de la Touche or something, and they go, "Who?" And then he goes, "Oh yeah, came up here last year with his son," and he went, "Yeah, that's the one," and I didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. I thought, oh, I didn't know he had a son, and then I've just realised when I was watching it, of course, he didn't mean his son. He meant a young boy that he brought up and said was his son, and I can't believe I've missed that all these years, and of course it's the wry smile on Marwood's face when he says it. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. We sit there and like, it sort of ties into when they're in the pub, going back almost to the start of the film, and you walk into a pub toilet and there's the sort of gentleman sitting in the corner just shouting "Ponce," walking into a toilet saying "I fuck arses" on the wall. It's just, there's this undercurrent of it throughout the film where, and Monty isn't, I mean, I suppose looking at it through our current eyes, and bear in mind this was set nearly 50 years ago, but, you can almost sort of forgive him thinking, well, he's just fallen in love with someone, maybe it's his midlife crisis or something, and, it's just one of those things where you just think, but it must be bloody scary. Having him chasing you around and jumping in the middle of the night.
I think it's as well because when they're in the cottage and he tries to have him on that night, he's done himself up in makeup as well, which makes him look even more terrifying because it's kind of, I don't know, it's obviously looked at himself and made himself beautiful, and he's a big man, and I don't just mean like fat. He's a tall man as well. He is like a giant. If he managed to pin you down, you're not going anywhere. That's happening, and it's just. But it's because he's so kind of camp and like you said, fruity, that it kind of almost it makes it almost slapstick. But like you say, if it was a tall bloke chasing a woman, it would just take on a completely different context. But it's just. it's played for laughs, but still the element of fear is totally there. It's not like a Benny Hill sketch. There is a genuine fear there as well.
Unfortunately, I was just thinking of Benny Hill at exactly the same time. Just thinking, imagine if they played yakety sax over that, and chasing throughout the night and everything else. But the fact that he's obviously thinking that I or Marwood is sort of up for it because of what Withnail's told him.
Yeah, I told him he was a toilet trader, which is still one of my favourite phrases ever.
The fact that you said that to me on Facebook yesterday and it still works,
Yeah.
Without having seen the film, I just thought, yeah, fair enough.
But this is the thing as well, actually, is that people who know Withnail, people who have seen it, obviously, because there are so many quotable lines in it, you can say one of these things, or you'll hear a line in everyday life that sounds the same, and sometimes you can't stop yourself repeating the actual line from Withnail, and then sometimes someone will understand what you're talking about, but most of the time people just look at you blankly. Not that I'm saying I usually say toilet trade in the middle of meetings or anything, but it's just those things. I mean, it's just, like you say, there's so many bloody quotable lines for it. It is ridiculous. Within 5 minutes of it, I came up with about 100 different quotes. I mean, going back to that scene in the pub, I mean, that is just one of the best scenes in the whole film. It's like, the funniest thing is it kind of happened to me once, not in a pub, but when I was going out with my what is now my ex, who was actually the person that introduced me to Withnail and I'd gone up to visit my parents in Liverpool. And at the time, I wanted to keep it on the down low and everything, because I'm such a player. Because if my Liverpoolian relatives found out I had a girlfriend, they'd be like, yeah, they'd be like on at me. So I was like, so I wanted to phone her. So I went across the road to use the phone box. And I was on the phone for probably about 20 minutes. And then eventually there's this guy that wanted to use the phone box and he queued up outside. And after 5 minutes, I was kind of like, oh God, yeah. And then I can't remember what he said. And at the time, I was at the height of my university pretentiousness. So I think I was wearing some kind of Hessian shirt, and kind of probably multicolored trousers or something. So to the average working man in Liverpool, I would have looked exactly like, the archetypal perfumed Pons. And he actually said something similar to that when I eventually came out the phone box. He said something like, it even smells like a Ponce or something, because I had Calvin Klein Escape on or something. It's and it just struck me, because I think we'd only seen Withnail about a month before, and I just thought, oh my God.
This guy, I think, would make a living out of the pubs now with the old, was it no spray, no lay toilet attendants and.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
I mean, it'd be like something out of the In-Betweeners then, but this is the thing. You talk about quotes, and I dread to think, and it must be horrible. Say if you work in a tea room, how many people of our age walk into a tea room going cake and tea? Yeah,
and just pointed to a table and gone, all right here.
Demanding the finest wines available to humanity.
And then threatening to install a jukebox in there. Well, I actually went to Penrith once, and I looked all over the place for the tea rooms, and it was only when I got back that I remembered it wasn't in Penrith. Even though it's set in Penrith, it's in Milton Keynes or Leicester or something, the actual place where they filmed it.
Yeah, I think I was doing various research for this, I say research looking at Wikipedia and IMDb, and they said that the tea room is a chemist in Milton Keynes.
Yeah, and it's very disappointing.
It's disappointing. You suddenly realise that, this moving on to a film that I'll hopefully discuss at some point is Superman 4, which was pretty much entirely filmed in Milton Keynes.
Yeah, oh my God. Is that the one with Nuclear Man in it?
Yes, it is, yes.
Oh, that is awful. Have you ever seen, there's a couple of YouTube channels. There's one that does honest trailers, and there's another one that does everything wrong with.
Yeah.
And the one for everything wrong with Superman 4 is great, because it just shows how much footage they keep reusing all the time.
It was probably longer than the film, to be honest.
Yeah.
But and again, sort of coming back here, and you think, you go to Penrith, you can go to anywhere in the Cotswolds or down at Bath or something. You've got these tea rooms that, even now, if you take away the obvious tourists, they are still going to be full of locals, the old ladies who go in there for cake and tea. And, you can imagine the shock when two, incredibly drunk, sort of louche lovies sort of swan in and take over the place, and you almost judge the owners for not calling the police sooner. But I say, bear in mind what I do for a living and where I work. It's the sort of thing that they call the police about anyway. These people are so out of character; they must be stopped.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I first saw it in 1996 when I was at uni, and by this point, I think I was starting to kind of, really come out of my shell at uni. I was kind of very boring at school, and didn't have any kind of, personality to speak of. And then when I went to uni, I kind of got away from that school mentality, and I'd started to sort of become more of an individual. And I think by the time I'd seen Withnail and I was kind of, I think I was a massive fan of The Cure as well, so I was generally dressing a lot in black. But by the end of that year, I was dressing, I think when I went back to uni in the third year, I was wearing a teddy bear t-shirt and stripy trousers. So it's like kind of, I was kind of on that path. And so I think Withnail and I really sort of struck a chord with me at the time, because I was very pretentious at uni. So it kind of like, I very much saw myself in that whole situation, and could very much identify with the whole kind of, kind of poncy, sensitive boy meets sort of working class, potential thug man. And it's like, kind of, that was my ultimate fear back in those days. Because obviously, at uni, you go into a lot of pubs, and some of the pubs you go to, you don't know. I mean, I grew up in Coventry, and I went to uni at Coventry, but I never went out. So I didn't know which of the pubs that you go into were the kind of biker pubs or the sort of the old men pubs. But we just wander in there as a bunch of students, and you just know now, you could just imagine everyone else look at you and hating you intensely, like, you bloody students. And yet at the time, you're so oblivious to it. So that whole kind of scene in the pub just really kind of it was me. That was, every time I went into a pub for lunch, that was what was going through my head, that someone was suddenly going to go up to you, go, "What's your name, MacFuck?"
It's like something out of Deliverance or something.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But, it's around then as well, you see, obviously, the say prop in the flat where it's the fairy liquid bottle and the pipe, that Withnail's obviously explaining just enough for us to realise that later in the film this may make an appearance and we'll need to know what it is. They're setting up in the fact that, you hear that, what was the Hollywood actor's name? Was it Tom Sizemore, who had a prosthetic penis in order to fake his drug tests? He's sat there thinking, obviously this is far more low budget because this was a fairy liquid bottle. And talking about getting the urine of a child in order
I was going to say, when they're driving off, he goes, "I need to procure a child."
Now, had Uncle Monty said that...
Oh man! But the funny thing is, when they actually start driving off, and he's leaning out the window and he shouts "scrubbers" at the bunch of girls at the bus stop. I have actually done that myself. I don't think it actually was to a bunch of girls. It might have been to a bunch of blokes, actually. When I was a little bit drunk coming home one night, I just leaned out the window, "Scrubbers!" Like that.
It's very much that version of bus wankers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But of course, like, we have the scene when they return back to London, and they're making so much, or they're losing so much time, that Withnail, in his inebriated state, has decided to make up the time and drive himself. And of course, this is where the fairy liquid bottle comes in. But we do have the awesome, one of my favourite quotes was, "I've only had a few ales." And of course, sometimes you need that Dutch courage to be able to drive. But the fact that the police pulled him over, and at that point he says, "My cousin's a QC." If that makes any difference. But this is like that sort of that alternative world that perhaps you need to be this sort of weird eccentric alky to get into, where that's your reaction. It's not. There's no apologies. There's no nothing. It's purely, "Well, I've just had a few ales. What's the problem?"
Yeah, quite.
Yeah.
But I think that the funny thing is as well is the ever increasing distance between the two characters in the film.
Yeah.
And obviously it's all played because it's set at the end of the 60s, and then of course I think it's Danny that makes that comment, is the greatest decade in the history of the world is coming to an end, like referencing the selling hippie wigs in Woolworths. And it's just like, and that whole kind of the sense of everything that, you know, will never happen again coming to an end very much sort of pervades the whole thing. And of course, that's, you know, the whole thing is it's their friendship that's coming to an end. But when you kind of look at the two characters, you can believe that they would live together, but at the same time, when you think about it, you think, well, how the hell would they have ended up together? Because obviously by the end of the film, Paul McGann has very much straightened himself out, but you can see at some point they'd have been, you know, probably at acting school, they'd have been very similar characters. But over time, they've diverged as Paul McGann starts to take the whole thing, you know, see it as a career and take it seriously. Whereas, you know, Withnail is very much the lovey who just thinks acting, he was born into it and therefore it should come to him. And it's just interesting to see the end of the film because it ends on a very down note. There's no, and I like that about the film. There's no kind of redeeming it. There's no kind of, and you know, well, actually, I think in the original book. Are you aware of the original ending in the book?
Yeah, I am. It's dark.
Yeah, very dark, yeah, because in the original ending of the book, I believe he pours a bottle of wine into, I think, what was Uncle Monty's shotgun and shoots himself.
Yeah, it's, you sat there thinking, you know, the end of the film, obviously, you know, we get to the point where Marwood says to Withnail, you know, don't walk me to the station, you know, making it a sort of physical separation. You know, they're in the rain in the park and, you know, it's like, right, this is where we end. And, you know, that's bad enough as it is. And, you know, get Withnail already half cut shouting Hamlet at some wolves in London Zoo. But yeah, I mean, imagine if they put that ending in. My God.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got the ending right on that. Yeah. I think because I think in that sort of scenario, it's best to leave it on like a kind of mystery. It's like nobody knows actually where Withnail went, but you kind of get the sense his life was going downhill anyway. It was already on that path, but you don't kind of need to see it and have it confirmed.
No.
And I think, I mean, hey, you never know. It opens up a sequel, doesn't it?
Withnail and I too.
Yeah, with the return of Withnail.
Although to be fair, I think, you know, that this is the thing is, you know, if this was a Star Wars film or something, they'd have one of these new spin-offs for it or something, and it'd be, you know, does Withnail go into rehab or does he end up making something of himself? But, you know, it's, as you said before, it's, you know, the film is their friendship, and in what is really quite a short period of time, you know, they've gone from, you know, degenerates living in a horrible squatted flat to the fact that, you know, Paul McGann's gone to the lengths of getting his hair cut, therefore he's a completely different person. But, you know, he's obviously got himself a job, and, you know, when he's come back and, you know, Danny and his squatter colleague are in there, you know, smoking away and talking about the end of the 60s, that's when it almost sort of hits him. Well, it does hit him. It's when they pretty much get evicted. And that's when he realises, like, right, I've had my fun. I've done my, you know, we've had our egg sandwiches and this, that and the other and gone to the pub at opening time. But this is it. This is where one, you know, Withnail is quite happy in that lifestyle because, one, it's all he knows and, you know, where's the motivation? But, you know, being the straight man in this anyway, I suppose it's quite easy for him to go through that transformation and go for a different job. And, you know, and like you say, it's seeing that the two sides sort of drift apart over, you know, what is essentially a weekend in the Lake District. It's, you know, it is poignant, and, you know, we talk about it as a comedy, but, you know, there really isn't that far from the tragedy that we hinted at the start, where, you know, ultimately they could quite easily have stuck Withnail at the end shooting himself in the head.
Yeah, and it's I suppose it's, when you look at the two characters as well, there's like, you know, you've got or Marwood or potentially Peter, as I think some other people seem to think there's some scene with a letter addressed to Peter or something, although it is Marwood. It's like he's kind of accepted that this, you know, it's time to grow up. It's like, you know, we've had our fun, but this is where the real world comes into it, you know, and you can't just keep living in this fantasy world. Whereas Withnail is clearly the sort of person who just can't accept that you have to sort of do that at some point. It's like the person who wants to sort of forever be a child, as like some kind of Peter Pan character, but at the same time, it's like a drunk Peter Pan, basically.
Oh God! Part of that really appeals to me. Like watching the young ones or something.
Well, I think that's the thing. It appeals to everyone's part that doesn't want to really grow up, but it's And I think it's one of those. He's one of those people who just can't accept that you have to do some growing up. It's like he can't face the idea of any kind of real responsibility, because even to him, acting is not a responsibility. It's his calling, and it's something that he should be doing. So it's not. He doesn't feel responsible by doing that. He just kind of feels that that's what he is. And whereas obviously Marwood is very much of the opinion that, well, it is a job and it's something that if you want to do, you have to be serious about it, and you cannot continue this sort of endless childhood and expect everything to still work. So there's clear divisions in the two characters before the film starts. But at the same time, again, similarly to how, leaving everything a mystery at the end of it, there's so much potential that someone could go back and do like the Adventures of Young Withnail or something, or or just like a prequel to see how they. But it doesn't need it. We don't need to see that. We just accept that they're together at the start of the film. We know they have a history, and we know that afterwards, one of them goes off and is probably very successful, because that's heavily implied, and the other one either ends up dead or an alcoholic and never succeeding. And I suppose, someone somewhere is probably trying to get commissioned like a kind of a reunion, like kind of Withnail and I 2020 or something, and it sees them return as old men. It's like, but we don't need it. I mean, okay, Uncle Monty wouldn't be in it, but like it just doesn't need it. It needs to exist in that time slot, and everything beyond what you see in the film is in the ether. It doesn't need ever making real.
But the weird thing is we talked about a novel, but this is actually a sort of semi-autobiography, isn't it? It's
the director.
This director has obviously gone through, a lot of this and embellished whatever to make the story. But the fact that Uncle Monty is based on a real person and Withnail is based on a real person is quite ludicrous.
I think the scene in it where he's talking about some young boy that's with an Italian director, and he's like, kind of like says, was it like a tenner for your tit or whatever? And he says, like, that's how he got the part. Well, that was based on the director's experience with Franco Zeffirelli, the Italian director, who did very much, come a bit Uncle Monty on him. So it's it'd be interesting to see. How much of the rest of it, obviously, I'm assuming the guy did not kill himself at the end, because he made a very good stab at writing something after he was dead, if he did.
But then, sort of looking at that and you think, that having that sort of outlandish, experience, maybe it makes him a better actor. I don't know. Like you sort of have to go through these things and channel them and all that. But it's very scary. But then the film almost didn't get made, and yet who was the saviour? It was the saviour of Life of Brian, George Harrison.
Yep, the handmade films. Yeah.
Who'd have thought it? I didn't see him doing a cameo like he did in Life of Brian, though.
Who was he in Life of Brian?
He played a very small. Was it Mr. Papadopoulos? I can't remember the line he did, but he appeared in one of the crowd scenes towards the end.
Oh yeah.
And it was just like, he's one of these people that, he obviously had more money but he obviously saw this project, and I'm sure he made back his money tenfold. But it was weird then that obviously they had While My Guitar Gently Sleeps in the background and plenty of Jimi Hendrix and everything like that. It's that was again sort of music of around that time. But one of the other trivia things was this was the film that prompted Jimi Hendrix's family to take back control of his back catalogue, because they thought it was too linked to drugs.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, I say Wikipedia, who knows? But if this is the thing that prompted them to worry about Jimi Hendrix's connection to drugs, then something's gone horribly wrong somewhere.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah. But
a bit late by that point as well.
Yeah, but it was also nice to see, and I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but Danny, who was played by Ralph Brown, the drug dealer, he was almost exactly the same character as he was in Wayne's World 2.
I've never seen Wayne's World 2.
It's passable, but yeah, but he basically plays a roadie in that. They try and get sort of set up their own concert in their town in America, and they come to England to get this legendary roadie as seen by Jim Morrison, and it's exactly the same character. You know, he tells this story in Wayne's World where he's talking about getting Ozzy Osbourne on stage because he had trouble with brown M&Ms and throwing a shoe at a Bengal tiger. But it's almost the sort of thing he'd tell now after just a regular Camberwell carrot on a Sunday afternoon.
That's another thing. That's another one of those culture references when you say Camberwell carrot to someone, and they either know what you're talking about or they don't.
Yeah, and in fact, they had to get one of the engineers to make it because he used to be a hippie.
Oh my god!
And in fact, they used about 12 Rizzlers for it. But I mean, this is it. I mean, we're talking about a film that, it's not as widely known as some of the films of the 80s, but it's very much, a home video sort of classic, wasn't it? It became a cult film, didn't it? It was, wasn't a huge success in the cinema. I mean, it did pretty well, but, it's one of those that, you talk about and talk, I need to get that film out on video or DVD or whatever. And, very much got a sort of a second life almost.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, because like I say, I saw it in 1996, it was kind of re-released in cinemas as part of its 10-year anniversary, which is an odd thing as well, because I always regard this as a 1986 film, and yet, if you look at it, it was released apparently in April 1987. But I saw it in 96, which was supposedly its 10-year kind of anniversary. So I actually got to see it. The first time I ever saw it was at the cinema. And after that, I then sort of got the video of it when that came out, and then I got the DVD, and then I got the Blu-ray of it, and I got the 20th anniversary sort of edition as well, which is like a steelbook with the soundtrack in it as well. But I already had the soundtrack because you used to be able to buy that, coupled with How to Get Ahead in Advertising.
Okay.
Which was a Judy Grant film,
Yeah.
and that one actually had more of the soundtrack on it. And speaking of, I really like the soundtrack as well, and I don't just mean the kind of music they've put in, like you said, all along the Watchtower and things like that, but the actual music itself. I mean, it's the theme tune's an odd one as well, because it's kind of got this very sort of lilting guitar, and then this kind of almost like kind of circus organ type sound to it, and it's an odd mix, but again, it sort of works.
But then, it reminded me like the music has. At the end of the film, as the credits start rolling, it was like a cross between Rocky and the Incredible Hulk, where he walks away at the end. He's walking away holding half a bottle of wine, just drifting off into, no doubt, certain death.
Yeah, quite.
Well, liver failure maybe, but probably curled up under a bridge. But I mean, you look at anything like that. I mean, I suppose you can use music to date the film as. Especially if it's set in the past, I'm sure, if we look at, the Vietnam films, they're so heavily influenced by the music to put it into that time. But, this was very much the same, opened on, McGann looking like John Lennon, with the round glasses and everything, and, have a little bit of Beatles and Jimi Hendrix playing as well. And it's just, and it feels weird talking about an 80s film with late 60s music and everything else, but by then we don't have the sort of references that we do today. People didn't have YouTube or IMDb or anything, so it was like going back in time in a way. But it certainly helped it in my opinion, because like you say, it was already looking back at a time nearly 20 years back then. Things had changed so much.
Well, quite, yeah. I mean, you think mid-80s was kind of, in the middle of Thatcher's Britain and, just under miners' strike, the end of major industry. But even in the film itself, you can see all the transition, because there's that scene just before they leave where they're knocking the old buildings down. Because, of course, when it's set is when, where they've been building all the sort of tower blocks. And it's this kind of, and that's the whole thing. That the whole film is all about the transition, like you say, the transition of the friendship, the transition of time. And it's kind of very much making the point of, the 60s is ending and this is like the new future. And as we all know, the 70s turned out to not be such a brilliant future at all, really. And all the high-rise blocks that they put up, in this bright new world actually turned out to be crap. And, they kind of ended up going back to sort of terraced houses instead. And it's sort of interesting to see that. But I mean, I suppose the advantage with the film is that because it wasn't made in the 60s, they can make that point because they know what happened because it was, made 20 years later. So it's all with the benefit of hindsight.
And yet they still managed to shoe in from Monty the line about we're at the end of an age, we're shat on by the Tories and shoveled up by Labour. And to be fair, that could date the film at any time, I think. But,
well, quite, yeah.
Especially one for the modern day.
Yeah. I think going on that point, like about dating, I think there's, I believe there's a couple of mistakes in it time-wise. I think, I'm sure at one point you see like a modern car.
Yeah.
At some point, I can't remember where. I don't know if it's on the motorway or something.
I think because they're going up the the M1, I suppose, would be going up there.
Yeah.
And I just think because I did hear someone not long ago talk about Withnail and I, and that was one of the things that kind of stuck. And even though it's a minor thing, seeing, I suppose, what would it be in the 86, 87? It'd be like a Ford Sierra or something.
But I think also the part of the motorway they were supposed to be on hadn't actually been opened at the time the film was set. I'm sure there's that as well. And actually, when in the scene where they're knocking the old houses down, they pan across and Trellick Tower is in the background. And I thought, I wonder if that was actually around then. And the thing is, it's a bit of an odd one because Trellick Tower started building in 1968. So before the film was set. However, it didn't finish until 1972. So it's like, yeah, whether it would have been at that stage, but who cares? It's like minor things.
If that's the biggest gripe about the film, I think it's done okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But okay, well, I say really. It was just a brilliant excuse to rewatch the film, to be honest. I think I got it from iTunes with one of their $1.99 bargains a couple of months ago, and not a bad one. It was, again, just I saw it the first time. I was probably about, I think that might have been sort of 96, 97, and my then girlfriend who was very much trying to want to be part of the Hampstead set and all that. I'm sure her parents knew Richard E. Grant or something. But it was very very odd one, but nice to reminisce. And as I sit here worrying about a mortgage of my Labrador and small child, thinking this is about a world away from my life. Thank fuck. All right. Well, Rich, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you about this, and thank you for the inspiration, because as I say, this was your call, and very well done, sir.
Well, it's absolutely thoroughly enjoyable to do so, mate. Thank you.
But so what we'll be doing with the podcast is we'll be playing the song that was number one at the time of the release, which was, as I say, another slight Beatles reference was "Let It Be" for Ferry Aid. So. Anyway, thanks for joining us at the Betamax Video Club. We'll have to return this before we pay any lateness fees, and we'll make sure it's rewound. So, Rich of the Football Attic, thank you very much.
Thank you very much too.
Nice.